Welcome back to Track Talk. We'll be doing a new game to the channel in this video. It's 1871, and I'm by no means a very experienced 1871 player. I'm definitely just starting out in this title. I think most players are probably in the same boat since it's a newer title, but I figured we would go through it in kind of broad strokes and just talk about this game and some of the strategic considerations as it kind of develops. I'm not going to do a teach of the game. I think you probably have to read the rule book to pick up all the subtle differences from more standard 18xx games, but we will do some kind of gotchas and just trace the outlines of the MacGuffins for this title. So I think in that vein, we'll start with the map. The map is this kind of oblong shape. It's not a very, I guess, uniform map. It's much longer than it is tall. And the map becomes relevant because the designer has intentionally excluded straight track from this map. So there's only one straight track in the game until brown, and that is going to have pretty big consequences on the way the map develops and which cities are able to link easily with other cities. The other thing to note about the map is that there is a good number of dits, and the value of the dits, or I guess the penalty of the dits, is really going to vary throughout the game. In the start of the game, you're running hex trains, which don't really care that much about dits. They're just going to hit anything on a hex. Then you get plus trains, which are able to incorporate dits. And then you all of a sudden go to a 7 train, which really doesn't like dits. And then you go to a D train, which of course can run dits in cities um, unlimited. So depending on what trains you have, it's going to really kind of determine how painful these dits are, particularly in this west area of the map where they're kind of scattered all over the place. There's a lot of terrain cost on the map as well. Some of them are pretty heavy. You are allowed to lay two yellow tracks, but the second track will cost you $20. So terrain cost, tile cost is a pretty significant feature of this game. And then I think you can see that there's probably a pretty important choke point, at least one choke point here in the center of the map where you have a pre-printed track, some gray tiles, just a general constriction of the vertical height of the map, and then two cities that are going to control access through this area of the map. So that's an important strategic consideration as well. Speaking of these two cities, you probably noticed that they both have these tokens that say Pier on them. The Pier is the company that is going to lead to a lot of the variability in the start of this game, or the variability in setup. Pier has 7 tokens scattered across the map, and 5 of them will be Pier company tokens in any given game. 2 of them will be assigned as different companies, so in this case Georgetown and Saurus, and they will be either the main line or the short line, which we will talk about later. Moving adjacent to the map for a moment, we'll just look at the tiles. We already talked about the single straight tile in the game, but I think it's also important to note that the brown tiles are really pretty incredibly limited. There's really just one of each of these orientations. There are some kind of goofy or wacky looking tiles like this one and this one, but you need to plan very far ahead in this game when you're laying track, because you may find that the brown tile you were hoping to get is not available when you eventually reach that phase. The other thing is that there are normal cities with kind of no specification, and then there's X cities, and then the CX city. Generally speaking, the X cities are going to be worth a little bit more money in any given phase than the normal cities. So you should be looking out for those revenue centers. I think that covers what I wanted to say about the map and the tiles. So we'll just jump into the game now. The auction in 1871 is very, very different than I think basically any other 18xx we've played. And one of the reasons that I think this game is probably best for 3 players, you'll note that we have a 3-player game here, is because of the design of this auction. So it's not a draft like 1846. It's not a waterfall like 1830. It's not free for all like 1817, where you just put things up and then bid on them ad lib. In this draft, each player is assigned a subset of private companies, which we'll briefly describe later, and then they put them up for auction, and the next two players in turn order are going to go back and forth bidding on them. So if you are the player that owns, for instance, the Union Bank, it's unlikely that it's going to be actually something that you can buy because the other two players are going to have a bid war over it, and the only way you're going to get it is if they both pass on it. Um, Going back to my point before about the player count, because the auction is limited to the two players following you, the behavior of the auction is pretty different in a three-player game versus a four-player game. If we had a four-player sitting here, then they would actually, the fourth player would end up with the private if Pilar and Jose didn't bid on it rather than the person who owns it. So I think that's an important strategic difference in the player counts. The other, I'm going to, just as an aside, the other important difference in terms of player count is the tranche system, which is going to define how many companies can be floated in a given stock round. I don't think I can actually see that until we get into a stock round, so we'll put that aside for now. So, having gone into the private auction, I think we should just briefly talk about the different classes of privates in this game. Most of the privates are related to shares. So, they're going to either give you shares in the peer. So, for instance, this gives you the Mount Stewart token in peer. This one would give you Charlottetown. Then there are other privates that are related to the main line, which in this case is Georgetown. This would give you the presidency of that. The short line, which is Saurus, this is the presidency of that. And then some of these just give you individual shares in the main line or short line. There's an important distinction between the main line and the short line. The main line is going to start floated, so you just get the shares when you buy this private, whereas the other company, the short line, you have to actually exchange your private for the share. So you're a little bit more flexible in terms of when you actually get those shares. And the short line doesn't actually start floated, so sometimes there's a little bit of a delay in the operation of that company. So despite all these funny names, most of these privates are actually just shares of one kind or the other. There are a few exceptions to that. The biggest one is the Union Bank. The Union Bank is a, I guess, player operated entity that can operate semi-independently of the player in the stock round. So each stock round, the Union Bank can buy a single share of one of the floated companies, or it can actually start a company. So it could, in theory, get two shares that way. And then at the end of the game, the net worth of whatever the Union Bank owns gets combined with the player's net worth to determine their final score. I think in the early games of this game, a lot of people thought the Union Bank was kind of overpowered. More recent strategy discussions seem to be leaning towards it being fine. I don't think I have enough play to personally have an opinion at this point on that. You can see the Union Bank has started with the mainline share, or at least one mainline share, and then I believe it's a randomly selected peer subsidiary that's the other share. Some players have suggested that this private kind of forms a clock on the game because the shares the Union Bank owns doesn't count for the player's certificate limit. So if the game goes long enough, the Union Bank player is going to be able to significantly increase their cert limit compared to the other players and should run away with it. So generally speaking, it seems like the strategy to work against the Union Bank is to speed the game up. The other two interesting privates, the first one is the Hunslet steam engine. This functions more like a traditional private in the sense that it can be bought into a company, but it also allows you to exchange for a train of the current rank in the bank, a little bit like the Rocket of China in 1880. But because you can only buy this in and activate it in the green phase, you actually will still fall back if you try and do this in your first company. You're just not going to be able to buy it in before the company operates. But later in the game, for a second floated company, it's viable to avoid a fallback on your first operation with this. And then the final kind of non-share private is the Schreiber and Burpee company. This comes with that special straight yellow tile, which does not really upgrade. Um, so it's just unique. I don't know that it's all that exciting otherwise. All right, so now let's just see how this works. So Ursula is going to be leading us off, and you can see Ursula is straight off the bat um, offering the Union Bank, probably the strongest private in the game, or one of the strongest privates at least. Pilar is going to bid for 150 for it, Jose 155, and Jose takes it for that. Now you can see that Pilar is now going to be offering one of their privates for the other two players to bid on, and they offer the Railcar Ferry, which is a share of the Mainline Corporation. Jose is going to bid on it, and Ursula is going to bid on it, so Ursula ends up with that private. If both of these players were to pass, then the private would go to the player that put it up. We mentioned that, but hopefully that's becoming a little more clear now that you're seeing how the auction flows. So in that last example, if Ursula and Jose had both passed, Pilar would have ended up with that private, and that becomes most relevant with these peer shares. The peer is a little bit of a dubious prospect, so many players try and avoid owning these shares, and we'll talk about how the peer functions at the end of the auction, but just realize some people are going to try and pass and avoid these peer shares. So Jose is offering the mainline concession, that's the Georgetown, and that will go for 180. Ursula's back and will be offering the short line concession. That's getting bid up and goes to Jose. Pilar is now putting up a peer share, and you can see, as I mentioned, Jose is going to pass on that, not interested in it. Ursula passes on it, so then Pilar is forced to buy it, and now they own the presidency of the peer company. Now, this is not defined yet. There are four other shares of the peer yet to be auctioned off. So whoever leaves the auction with the most of them, or the highest percent of the peer, is going to run that company, and there's some special rules surrounding that. If there's a tie, I believe it's determined by the number here. So the Alberton would outrank the Summerside, for instance, in determining the presidency of the peer company. I think there's been some discussion about the relative value of the peer companies. So you may want to consider the number if you think there's going to be a tie, and then also you just want to consider the map position of the peer token that is associated with the share. And we'll talk about that. So Jose is now up. This is another share of the short line, and it looks like that will go to Pilar. Ursula is going to auction off the company that gives you the train. That goes for 120. Pilar is offering another peer company and is going to be forced to buy it. Interestingly, if for some reason Jose and Ursula both passed and Pilar did not have enough money to buy it, I believe it goes to the person with most money. So there is some jockeying around spending your cash at the right times in this auction, so you're not forced to end up with a bunch of peer shares. If you can exhaust your money, then you're kind of safe from having to purchase them. So there's a little bit of strategy in terms of what you put up for auction and when. Jose is offering shipbuilding, which is another Soros share, and looks like Ursula wins that. We have another Soros share. I think you guys are getting the idea here, so we're going to move through this a little bit more quickly. Pilar is ending up with a massive percentage of the peer here, not the ideal position necessarily, and also ending up with probably less desirable companies of the peer. Mount Stewart and Charlottetown are the two that we've been kind of identifying as controlling that choke point. Okay, so the auction is now over. The privates have been distributed, and you can see that Pilar and Jose have nearly split the peer. Looks like Jose is the current president of Soros, or the short line, and then Ursula is the president of the Georgetown. The Soros presidency is not always secure. You have to be very careful that you are not going to lose control of your presidency if someone were to exchange one of their privates for a share. So if we look at shipbuilding, for instance, you see that it can be exchanged for a share of this company. but then the player can still buy a share. So they can leapfrog you if they're one share behind by exchanging for a share and then buying one to steal your presidency. So that's a little tidbit to know when you're the president of the shortline company. I think now we have to talk about the tranches and the way the peer company operates, or I guess devolves. So tranches are going to determine if anybody can par a new company. You can see that currently all the tranches are closed, and they will open when both companies in the preceding tranche have operated, or if both companies are totally sold out. So if the GT and the SO sold out and floated up, which I don't think there's enough money for that to ever happen, then this new location would open. But in the next next stock round, if the source floats and operates, then there will be one company that's available to par. So this makes the the priority deal very, very important in this game, because you may never be able to float a company if you don't happen to have priority at the right time when the tranche is open or becomes available. Priority in this game, as an aside, is pass order priority. So it's not left of last action. It's not related to how much money you've spent. It's just if you pass and then don't take any other actions, the order in which you do that will be your priority. So first person to pass is first, and so on. The peer is important because when we're talking about these tranches, there's only two ways you can start a company. You can float a company that is a peer associated company. So one of the companies that is associated with these shares, for instance, the Summerside, is a company that can be floated. Or you can split an existing company. And splitting companies is very important, but you can't split the peer. Well, I guess you are splitting it by floating one of these companies, but you get my drift. So once new companies have floated, you can split them into a parent and child company, and that is a real important way of multiplying your capital, or I guess treasury, company treasury. And it's also a way of protecting your routes and kind of splitting up the map. So when you float a company of the peer, the corresponding share goes away when that company is floated, and then the investment in the peer is recalculated. So if someone were to float the Summerside, it could be anyone. It doesn't have to be Pillar. This Summerside share is going to be immediately converted from a peer share to a Summerside share, and then in that case, Pilar and Jose would both be 50% invested in the peer, but Pilar would have the lower number, so would remain the president. So the peer is going to, start the game with a bunch of tokens across the map, but then these tokens are going to be slowly converted into other companies, which puts the peer president, in my opinion, in a real rough spot, because you don't want to develop so much track that it's really incentivized for another player to steal that company. But on the other hand, you usually have a pretty high density investment in the peer where these shares are paying more than normal shares would. So you do want the peer to be kind of good. It's just a difficult balancing act, and it's probably one of the key tensions in the game. It's always nice if you are the peer president and you're able to lay yourself on a lot of nice track and then start the company associated with that track. So let's say, you're the peer president and you have the Charlottetown thing, and you're able to start Charlottetown. Well, now you're able to kind of have exclusive access to that track for a while and reap the benefits of what the peer has done for you. But that's easier said than done. The peer has no train liability, so it doesn't have to have a train. You're not going to be bankrupt because you're the peer president. But it does consume spots against your cert limit. So if you have the peer presidency and you're not running any trains in it, that is a worthless share that's doing nothing for you. The other downside for the peer is that it has no stock value. So usually when you're running companies, you're getting not only the revenue, but also the share appreciation as the share moves right across the market. The peer doesn't do that, so it's a little bit less value as a result. The peer has $80 of income for most of the game to help afford trains. and then the peer can only ever buy one train from the bank at a time. But I don't believe that restriction exists for buying trains out of other companies. So if the peer president has another presidency, oftentimes you'll see them buying trains with their lead company and then shuffling them over into the peer to get it around that restriction. All right, but I think that's probably enough of an intro. Let's just get into this. So really nobody has much money in this first stock round, which is very common. Let's see if anybody wants to exchange any shares to try and float that short line. Jose's passing, Pilar's passing, Ursula passes. So we only have two companies operating, the GT and the peer. One thing I forgot to mention is because the peer has no stock value, it or no stock price, it always operates last in the operating round. Georgetown is up. He's going to be operating in the bottom right hand of the map and will lay his home and then a second yellow tile. As noted, that yellow tile did cost it $20, and then you had to pay the terrain cost for that first tile lay. So that is a recurring feature in this game, that the track ends up eating into your presidency treasury pretty heavily. At the start of the game, we have two H trains. We haven't really talked about the train roster very much, but you'll see that you get a little bit of a breather at the start of the game. The 2H, the 3H, and the 4H don't have a rusting event between them. But after you get to the 5H, every rank of trains has a rusting event associated. So it's just a constant treadmill of trying to afford the next rank of trains. And the ranks are pretty thin. So the 6Hs, there's only two of them. So you could very easily find yourself in a situation where you have a 2H that rusts on the 5, and then these 6s are bought right away, and then all of a sudden you're into the 2 pluses, and your 4H is rusted before you could even run your 5H. So it can be a very explosive train rush. Georgetown is going to buy a 2H, buys two of them, and we are up to the pier. We'll have to see where the pier wants to start laying track. Of course, it has 5 options: Alberton, Summerside, Charleston, or Charlestown, Mount Stewart, and Murray River. I see a lot of people do this Murray River with the 2H trains. The early game, you can take advantage of some decent runs, but I don't know what we're going to see here. Mount Stewart looks like it's the choice, and it's going to head down into those double dits. Buys a 2 train and is limited to buying a single train, so that's all we'll see. Stock round 2, Jose passing, Pilar passing. Ursula is going to buy a mainline share. The other players are actually going to join her, so Pilar also buying it. And looks like Pilar is going to do a little friendly stock trashing. GT is falling down. The stock movement rules are pretty standard in 1871 compared to other titles. I will mention that the market and your treasury both pay to the company, so there's not really a huge distinction between market versus treasury shares in this game. And then Pilar is going to go back and float the short line, so we should have a third company now in the game. Short line, because of the falling back in the last operating round and the trashing, is going to operate first. Looks like they are heading towards this corner here, and again, this is a pretty common opening that I've seen, where with a 3H and a 2H, you're able to run both ends of this loop into Elmira for decent revenue. So it looks like we're going to see the Soares player buy the 2H and then the first 3H. And that's exactly what goes on. GT, first time running trains, but has to lay track first. Going to lay one of the many double dits in this game. And looks like they get into, I don't know how that's pronounced, peaks. Going to drop a token here. The main line in particular seems to oftentimes be quite lucrative throughout the game, just because it's able to develop good track early in the game and then secure those runs with the tokens early on. So the main line oftentimes is pretty lucrative. It just depends whether or not the president is able to get the right trains into that company for the late game. Regardless, for now, running two 2H trains for $80 and pays it, buys a 3H. Pier is back up and is, instead of going to be laying towards Mount Stewart, is going to lay that track on Murray River that I see pretty frequently, and should be able to, I'm not sure why they decided to make that change. Well, we're still learning. So does now go back and lay into peaks to join up with the Grand Trunk, or not the Grand Trunk, the Georgetown. I'm mixing my titles here. Runs for just 50, pays it, and buys a 3H as well. But you can see what I mean about these ranks of trains being very small. We're already into the 4Hs in stock round or operating round 2. Stock round 3 is up. People have a little bit more cash now that the companies have been paying out, and Jose is leading us off. He's going to exchange for a Soros share, and will also be buying a Georgetown. Ursula buys a Georgetown as well. Might see that company float up. We'll see. Pilar is going to buy the Georgetown, and Jose's passing. This is that pass order priority I was talking about, so he's going to be first in the next stock round as long as he doesn't take any more actions. Ursula's passing. Pilar going to do a little more trashing. I think we saw this from her in the last stock round as well, and instead goes back for the short line share. This puts her just one share behind Jose, which he needs to be aware of. If he were to somehow lose priority on Pilar, she could immediately exchange her private for a share and then buy a share to steal that presidency. But I don't think that's going to be possible in this stock round. Looks like everybody is passing, and we are into operating round 3. Soros is up, lays Almira and S11. It's going to run both of his trains for 90 and buys the first 4H. Still haven't had a rusting event just yet, but we are looking at the first one soon on the 5Hs. Georgetown, upgrading Mount Seward, now has access to green track. May see him grab that token. Yep. This is a pretty important choke in the map. Later in the game, some of the X tiles, I think 2 of them, do open up to 3 holes. Yes. And then one of them can further upgrade. So I think that in total, there's going to be a potential for 3 normal cities with 3 holes, not counting this CX, which is another one. Maybe it's 4, because I think the CX also consumes an X. So I think there's potential for 2 brown X's and then both of these gray tiles to be out there. So the map does kind of open up later in the game, and you'll see that the D runs actually can be pretty monstrous. But for most of the game, this choke point here is going to be very, very painful for anybody trying to run east or west. Running for 150, pretty good revenue. Going to buy a 4, has 4 trains in the company now. Pier, just upgrading his home and running 2 trains. Actually, not running the 2 trains out of Murray River, and I guess that makes sense. This offboard is kind of underwhelming. Going to run one of the trains up here into Peaks. 130, pays it out, and buys a 4. Stock round 4. One of the things that we haven't talked about in the stock rounds is there's some wrinkles in terms of the normal stock sale and rules surrounding that. So you can sell 30% of a company in a single action. In 1830, for instance, you can sell up to the market limit, which is 50 or 5. But in this game, you're limited to 30%. So that makes cross investment a little bit safer because it's a little bit harder to dump companies on players. And then the other thing is that there is no market limit, so you can have more than 5 shares in the market in this game, which can become relevant. We have not seen the Union Bank do anything yet, so we'll have to pay attention and see if that happens in this stock round or not. Looks like the short line is being bought again. Ursula is going to pass. So I guess hoping to take advantage of this tranche in the next stock round. Otherwise, sitting on a lot of cash. Pilar going to buy the short line as well. And Jose selling the Grand, I keep going to call it the Grand Trunk, the Georgetown, and going to buy a SO with the Union Bank. So he sold this and then was able to basically lend the Union Bank money to buy a Soros share. And that's going to make it very hard for Pilar to steal this company from him, even with exchanging shares with her privates. The Union Bank, again, is good to get shares into early because it doesn't count against your cert limit and it can only buy one share or two, I guess, if it starts a company per stock round. So you want to start that process early, but it is money that you're not going to be able to get back to use to manipulate, your stock portfolio throughout the game because these shares can't be sold and there's no way really for you to recover the money from the Union Bank once it's in there. So you need to be a little bit careful about slowing your snowball by putting a lot of money into the Union Bank in like stock round two or very early in the game. Ursula going to pass still. Pilar is going to pressure for the um, source presidency, but I don't believe she owns the other exchange share, so won't be able to take it. Could also just be exchanging this to sell these shares and then float a new company. Definitely seen that before. This is sell buy. So sells shares and is going to at least reserve the presidency of the Mount Steward. So this is the first par we've seen in the game. And note that it is a peer associated company. It is associated with this share here. So eventually, when this company floats at 60%, this share in Jose's portfolio is going to be converted to a Mount Steward share, but Pilar is still going to be the president. The Mount Steward company is here at this choke point, so a pretty reasonable company. I don't know if we're actually going to see this float. I don't think we will. I think she just wanted to reserve the presidency. There is, interestingly, a private that will allow you to exchange for any company that is not the main line or the short line or the Prince Edward Island. So whoever has that private, actually, I think in the 3-player game that private doesn't exist. I think that's just in the 4-player game. Yeah, I think it's like Ice Fairy or something like that. So never mind. In the 4-player game, starting this kind of company, you could, in theory, steal it with that private in the same manner that we were talking about stealing the short line by exchanging shares. But I don't think that's a relevant concern in this game. Jose passing. Ursula is going to go back and buy a share now. I think they realized that they were trying to hold priority to float a company in the next stock round. Now they probably won't have that opportunity because this is not going to float, so the next tranche is not going to open. So they've decided instead to just invest their cash. I assume that's what the logic here is. Pilar is going to buy Pang share in the GT, and I think everybody passes now. Yep. All right, operating round 4. So I think that was a good example of some of the considerations in this game that are kind of unique in terms of manipulating operating order and these tranches. It's not something I've really encountered in other 18xx. Source is up and is going to upgrade its home, running 3 trains now. So by upgrading home, gets access into this offboard, which is pretty lucrative. And with that, it's going to be running for 200. Pretty good revenue. Buys the 5, and we had our first rusting event. So GT is probably pretty sad about that. Their 2Hs are not going to be able to run. GT does have good trains still and is going to continue heading west, running for 140 and is going to buy a 5. We're almost at our second rusting event. You can see how quickly this train roster moves. Pier is going to lay down here in the south to get into this offboard, and with a 4H, it looks like they'll be able to reach that. So should have pretty good revenue now. Running for 140 and half pays. The Pier is the only company that can do this, by the way. The other companies can't half pay. It's going to buy the last 5, and we are into 4.2. We'll see if that 6 comes out. The 6 costs 180, so it would be very reasonable for the Saurus to do it. And really just kind of kicking the other players when they're down, just going to continue rusting their trains, taking advantage of operating first. So that's a very powerful strategy here. Train limit doesn't drop until we get into the plus trains, so definitely has room for the 6 if they want it. Upgrading Almira, extra 20 bucks on its runs, and it's going to run for 220 now. It does buy the 6, so just brutal for these players that are trailing in operating order. GT heading west still. It's going to be a theme to that, I imagine. 150 pays it out, buys a 6, and you're just constantly treading water in this game trying to keep up with the trains. It can be very frustrating. Pier running a 4 and a 5, and is going to upgrade Hunter River. Doesn't look like it's actually running that track, just running for 160 and pays it out. So even though the Pier revenue is trailing these other companies, I guess not so much the Georgetown, but certainly the Source, you have to realize that these are higher density shares. So, two shares for Pilar is getting 60% of that revenue, as opposed to, 6 shares in the GT. Jose buying a GT, Ursula. Still nothing can be floated because the Mount Stewart didn't actually float. It was just reserved. So limited options for these players in terms of what they can buy. Buying the Saurus. We'll see if Pilar is interested in floating her company. Looks like for now she's going to buy the paying GT. I think she realizes that the other players are going to be forced to buy her shares in the Mount Stewart if they want to invest their cash anywhere, so might as well pick up the paying shares first. Jose is passing. Ursula passing. Looks like they aren't that interested in helping Pilar. Well, they're going to at least wait to see what she does. She is going to start working on floating it. And after she makes a pretty significant investment, it looks like the other players are okay with helping her out. Probably doesn't, in a 3-player game, I guess you don't really care if you're first or second as long as you're one of those two, because that guarantees you're going to be able to float a company in the next stock round if this company floats. So Pilar is selling and we'll buy another share. That company's now floated, and I imagine we're going to see everybody passing now, except for maybe Pilar. Jose, Ursula passing, Pilar, yeah, she still has action she wants to take. Gonna max out the investment on the Mount Stewart. This company's not gonna operate in the first operating round of the set, but it is pretty set in terms of track development from what I recall. Yeah, just courtesy of the main line has built a lot of track for it. And you're gonna see the Mount Stewart, I'm almost certain, immediately upgrade in token and peaks just to secure their runs. Everybody else should be passing, and we're into the operating round. So this is operating round 5. Seems like this game tends to go 7, 8, or 9 operating rounds. Occasionally you'll see it 6, and then I guess if someone bankrupts, it could kind of go anywhere. But should be expecting probably around 7 or 8 operating rounds. Saurus heading west and kind of blocking themselves with that dit. Not really sure where they're headed long term with that. Running for 220 still. MS first operation is going to buy the private that gives them the train. So this is what I was talking about with the Rocket of China in 1880. The Mount Stewart is actually not going to fall back as a result of having this private, which is almost as important as just getting the train. The other thing that it allows is you can loot your treasury. So we know how important that is in 1830. This is the only private that really allows you to do that in 1871, which is a pretty big boon for Pilar, right? She has a massive investment in a company that's not going to be running at least once, but she still gets $200 of revenue from that company in this operating round, which is pretty nice. So it's really a pretty good private. You don't always have to buy it in for 200. Some people just use it to afford one of these more expensive trains as a get out of jail free card. But for right now, we are seeing her use it very efficiently. Buys the first 2+ train. I mentioned this at the start, but the plus trains hit 2 cities or the end cities and then as many dits as they can reach. So usually a little bit better, or generally strictly better than the H trains in most situations. Upgrades peaks and tokens there, no surprise. Running the 2 train for 90, and do they pick up another train? They do. The GT, for once in its life, hasn't been rusted before it could run. Sure, it's thanking its lucky stars for that. Is heading over to Malpec, I guess that's how it's pronounced, which gives guaranteed access to all the companies into England once you have a long enough train. So obviously reaching England is prohibitive when you have a H train because you got to cross all these borders. But once you have a long enough plus train or even a D train, this $130 combined revenue of these 2 centers is pretty darn good. So running for 140 for now and withholding. Not going to be quite enough for a plus train, but clearly Ursula's a little bit worried about her prospects here. Pier is upgrading Charlottetown. Not sure where they're heading just yet, but just have a single 5 train. So it looks like they'll be running it down south into the offboard for $90. And one thing I forgot to mention is notice how we used to have a 60-40 split with 3 shares in Pilar and 2 in Jose. Jose's share went away when this Mount Stewart company floated. So now Pilar is getting 75% of this revenue instead of 60%. And that's why the Pier is a little bit of a balancing act. Even though the revenue can struggle, and sometimes it's a little bit of a drag to have your track being stolen away from you all the time. If you are able to navigate this well, you can end up with a very high percent presidency that you may be able to take good advantage of the revenue. Saurus, 2 trains. Again, the track roster in this game is super weird. So while this would usually, in other games, block you, there may be a upgrade here that we need to be aware of that will allow them to head west. So they just laid this track here. So that would be something like this, or I suppose this. That would eventually get you out of that corner. This looks like a brass knuckle to me. I'm gonna start calling that the brass knuckle track. Nobody's gonna know what I'm talking about, but runs for 190, pays it. Mount Stewart, second operation is going to be laying the Georgetown home. Could even see a token there. I don't know if it's worth doing that. It is an X city, so decent revenue, but you can run to it. You may want to save that token for Hunter River instead, this track, and just guarantee runs west. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like they're not going to token it for now. Runs their 2+ for 90 and pays it. GT is laying a DIT. I'm not entirely sure where they're going with that. And is going to run, does token in Hunter River. That's the track that we were talking about for the Mount Stewart. So GT is now out of tokens, but it has a really good run already secured for itself. Runs for 150. Is it going to withhold again? No, pays it. So it looks like they were withholding for token money, not train money. Gonna have to find some way to afford the next rank of trains soon, though. So may see them trying to float another company. We'll see. Pier, last company to operate, has 2 trains now and is going to run for 150. Stock round 6. 2 slots in the tranche system are open, so Jose and Ursula, because they were passing, should be able to float companies here. And we'll see how they want to do it, if they want to try and split a company, or if they're going to take one of these peer associated companies. Pluses and minuses to both. The map position of the peer companies, particularly Charlottetown, I want to say, is pretty attractive. But splitting is going to allow you to refinance your main company, start a new company with a decent treasury, and has some upsides as well. So Jose is going to sell out of the short line and actually dumps it on Ursula. I don't think we saw that happening. That's a little bit dangerous. We were saying how the Georgetown is a little bit cash poor, going to be struggling to buy trains, and now is also the president of the Saurus, who has the exact same portfolio, basically $70 for 75 in the same 2 trains. So that's a little bit problematic. Ursula may need to consider splitting a company in order to refinance some cash into her companies. We'll see. Jose is going to actually have his Union Bank start the C. So we were talking about how the Union Bank can only buy 1 share in a stock round. Well, by starting a company with the Union Bank, you can buy 2 shares into the Union Bank, which is pretty efficient, pretty nice. You just need to be very careful that you don't have this company stolen from you. The Union Bank can only buy the 2 shares in the stock round, so somebody could very easily buy 3 shares over you. But you'll notice that Jose has the peer share that's going to be converting into the Charlottetown, so he's not worried about somebody taking advantage of this to steal this company away. So I imagine what we'll see is him actually steal his own presidency from the Union Bank in order to defend it. So that's just a way of getting more shares into Union Bank early. And then the Charlottetown is going to be a good company. So if you can buy above your 60% cert limit, by having a bunch of shares in the Union Bank and then a bunch of shares in your personal treasury. That's really powerful too. So that's a nice move from Jose. Ursula is going to start the Summerside. That was one of the companies, the peer companies on the west, so it doesn't look like she'll be splitting, and she'll now be running 3 presidencies for the time being. Both tranches have been consumed, so Pilar is not going to be able to float a company, but will have to invest in the other players' companies. Pilar is going to buy that C, so again, in theory, this is vulnerable, but Jose has plenty of cash to defend that. And immediately we'll buy a share there. Ursula buys the S, and Pilar is continuing to pressure this. So she will temporarily steal the presidency from the Union Bank, it looks like. Actually, that's not even true, because when Jose buys the share, he's going to immediately convert the peer share, and he'll be up to 3 shares ahead of Pilar. So he'll never lose control of the company. And you can see that's exactly what happens. Ursula buying the S, almost floated there. Pilar still pressuring for the C. I don't think Jose needs to be worried, can pretty easily lock up control of that company. Ursula is going to buy the last C, and Pilar is going to pass on a lot of money. So it is painful to do that, but I guess you don't want to leave yourself vulnerable to dumps. So you can anticipate, buying more shares in these weak treasury companies could be a setup for Ursula dumping it on you. And then also, you just want to make sure you can have your choice of companies in the next stock round. Fair enough. Jose is going to buy the Mount Steward. Ursula buying the S. Will need some help or to sell a share to finally float that, it looks like. Pilar still passing. Jose up to 30% of the MS. In theory, safe from a dump from Pilar, because remember, she can only sell 3 shares in a single action. Ursula is going to exchange for the Saurus and then presumably sell that and then float the Summerside. Yes. Pilar is going to come off of passing to buy the Summerside as well. That's a little bit surprising. Jose buys the Summerside. Ursula passing, so now is first into the next stock round. Pilar is still going to buy shares, so maybe this is the master plan. If you float the company up, then the next tranche opens. So now she will be able to float a company in this stock round. That's pretty nice. So probably going to see her sell those shares and float something else would be my guess. Jose looks like he's going to take a page out of Pilar's book and is going to at least reserve a presidency of the Murray River. The Union Bank came with a share of this company, so he's got 30% control of it. Could even see him float it with a single stock sale. Ursula is going to sell out of the GT, wants to make sure she can get a reserve presidency as well, and is going to float the A. The A in this game, I don't know how you play this company. It's locked all the way up here on its own and really doesn't have great routes. Yeah, you have an $80 revenue center here, but early in the game, there's no way you're going to have a train long enough to reach it. And then later in the game, that's kind of underwhelming. I mean, that's all you got. You got nobody to help you build all the way over here to these other revenue centers. So I don't understand how that company is viable. I'll have to play more to try and figure that out. But I will note that Pilar's master plan here of opening up the tranche for a new float has helped the other players almost as much as it's helped her. Yeah, you're going to get the float, but the other 2 got to pick the companies before you. I think we've seen 4 companies float in this stock round. This is pretty explosive. Let's see what Pilar does if she's going to float something here. So our first split. So she is splitting this company here. And the way this works is everybody's going to exchange half their shares for the same number of shares in this kind of arbitrarily named child company. So Pilar is going to end up with 3 and 3. Jose will end up with 1 and 1. And Ursula's going to stay with just a single share in the MS. So chose the moral branch and choosing a par value. I didn't comment on this, but the par values available change throughout the game based on which trains are available. They get lower. So if you wait too late to float your company, you may have a hard time affording these expensive trains. But regardless, is going to pick 74 as their par. You can see, as noted, she ends up with 3, Jose ends up with 1. The shares that were exchanged, so 4 shares total of the Mount Stewart, end up in the treasury. And when these are bought, they are going to feed money back into this company. So that's a way of recapitalizing your initial company. And then all the shares that are in the market for the newly floated company give you your starting capital for that company. So both companies get new money by doing this split procedure. And now she has the option of assigning the assets of these two companies between the two companies. She also had to, at some point, pick a token of the Mount Stewart to change into a Moral Branch token. I think we glossed over that, but she chose this Peakus or Peaks token. So very interesting mechanic in this game. Looks like they're not going to transfer any trains over, and they transfer a little bit of cash. So I'm sure there was some rationale between the amount of cash that was chosen to switch over. It looks like token and then some train money. All right, so 5 companies have floated, 8 companies total have floated now, and that is all the companies that we will see for the rest of the game. There's no way to float companies other than what we've seen. So with 5 new companies, we're going to see this train roster just evaporate. We're going to get to the 7 train in operating round 6.1. Let's watch how fast that is. Jose is going to sell out of the Mount Stewart and presumably float his Murray River. Yep. Ursula working on the Alberton. Sounds like Albertsons. Alberton. Pilar is going to buy a Mount Stewart for now, but I'm assuming we will see her float her Moral Branch at some point. Jose buying the Murray River, almost floated. The Ursula player has some work to do to float this A still. We'll see how she manages that. Pilar buying the Mount Stewart. So really focused on the pre-existing company, not going to float her Moral Branch, or at least not be in a rush to do so. Jose, potentially the last share for him, and has floated the Murray River, which is going to change the pier distribution. Pilar is the only investor in the pier, and actually when I guess it's the Alberton floats, the pier is going to be totally gone because her pier share is going to convert. So maybe Pilar is hoping that doesn't happen, but I think it's pretty much guaranteed to. Ursula buys a 5th share. Pilar buying the MS still, so she's up to 60% there, and only needs 20% to float the Moral Branch, so is going to be able to do that no problem. Looks like she'll actually reach her cert limit by doing that. Jose's passing. Ursula sells out of the Mount Stewart and does take the Alberton. Pilar now going back for the Moral Branch, and that company has also floated now. So wow, pretty crazy stock round. And that just kind of happens sometimes in 1871. Not the first time I've seen like 4+ companies float in a stock round. Ursula up on the Saurus. This is the company that was dumped on her way back at the start of that stock round. It's hard to remember that far back, but this is her new presidency. Not sure where that track is laying. Again, the track in this game is really weird, so it's hard to really predict what's going to happen here. I think we're going to end up seeing that brass knuckles track here, and that will allow them to run straight across, I think. Well, we'll see. Is that the case? This track, yeah. I think that would allow them to run west with the straight component of it. Running for 190, withholding, and presumably going to pick up a 2+ train. Just withholding for now, okay. And, well, actually that makes sense because she only owns 20% of that. Yeah, so, okay. Charlottetown, newly floated company, split presidency. Pretty important company because it has this track that we've been talking about, the choke point. Laying into Belfast, and maybe eventually hoping to link up with the Murray River down south there. I don't think it's likely the Murray River is going to be able to snag that token in Charlottetown, though. I imagine some of these other companies are going to have something to say about that. Buys a 2 plus, and the Summerside is up. Gonna lay a single track for now, buys the last 2 plus, and doesn't buy a 3 plus. I assume that's because Ursula saw that her GT was next to operate and didn't want to rust her own trains. GT running for 170 and is also withholding. Again, only owns 20% of it, so just trying to rehabilitate her position in the game. Now we see the rusting event. MR is not laying any track yet. Buys a 3 plus. And now the Moral Branch. Moral Branch was that split company from the Mount Stewart, so operating out of Peaks. Someone will have to tell me how that's actually pronounced. Going to buy a 3 plus. Does it buy the 4 plus as well? Yes, it does. So, as we noted, pretty explosive train movement here. The first brown track is laid. And remember, we said that these brown tracks, there's only one of each orientation. So the decisions made here are pretty crucial in terms of what track is available to your opponents. If you were more familiar with the track roster than I am currently for this game, you could really be pretty nasty with your track decisions here. Hunter River is going to be tokened, so the MS and GT have pretty much locked down the map in their runs, at least until these brown upgrades eventually give 3 holes to some of these cities. Runs its 2. Does it buy the last 4 here? It does. Alberton, last company to operate, and also the last new company, is laying its home and buys the 7. So we did, in fact, make it all the way into the 7s in the first operating round of this set. That was crazy. Also, what are you going to do with a 7 train in the Alberton? It like has no track. This is why I hate this company. I've gotten stuck with this at least once, and I don't know what to do with it. I'll have to watch more games to see what other people have figured out. Saurus is going to upgrade its home for now. Looks like they're trainless, which is not a surprise at all, given how many ranks of trains just got exploded through. And Ursula kind of did herself a favor by not buying trains and just withholding, because all the trains that she would have bought probably would have rusted. So now she's able to just emergency buy a 7 and be safe. The 7 is a permanent train. Only 2 of the trains in the roster, in the train roster, are permanent. The 7 and the D. Even the 4 plus trains that we just saw bought do rust when the D comes out. So Ursula is as bad of a position as we were worried about, is actually going to end up with the permanent trains first, it looks like. Has to sell a bunch of shares, so that is problematic. But I guess is selling them in the Summerside. I don't know if it's really going to be possible to suitcase that Summerside. This map is so small, it's pretty hard to see that happening. But I guess can wait for the other players to give her track. It is expensive track to lay, $120. So conceivable that that could last for a while. Shiny new 7 train in the Saurus company. Charlottetown is up. And are they going to be heading down towards the Murray River? I think we thought that, but for now, just upgrading Belfast. And we'll pick up a 7 as well. So the C must be an example of a company that floated, bought its trains, and then had those trains rust before they ever operated, because the C was a newly floated company. So let's go back and just look at this for a second. The C bought a 2 plus, yeah, and never got to run it because the 7 train came out in the same operating round. That's pretty crazy. I mean, that's a lot of fun. That's like a real cool feature of this game. Hunter River upgraded 3 plus is going to run, but not for much longer. 190 and pays that out. Mount Stewart upgrading its home and is going to pick one of the 2-hole cities. So if we look at this, There is a 3-hole that could have been laid there. Um, but of course, if you're owning a token there, why would you want to do that? I guess the reason you'd want to do that is because it's $10 more if you. Um, no, actually, oh, that's interesting. So the 2-hole cities are actually worth more than the 3-hole city. I feel like usually it's the other way around to incentivize people to open up the map. Okay, well, not going to be opening up the map until gray at least. Runs for 260. Murray River, upgrading his home. Running for 210. Morrill Branch, 2 trains in this company, but they will be rusting soon. And it's going to upgrade Charlton. Running for 330. Summerside. This company hasn't bought a train and is going to upgrade its home. Doesn't lay any other track though. Does it buy 7? I don't see why you wouldn't. Yep. So we are staring down the D trains. Ursula running the 7 train in Alberton. The saddest 7 run you've ever seen, just $40. Pays it out. We're into stock round 7, and I think we must be approaching the end of the game here. That's something that we haven't talked about. The only way the game ends is when the D train is bought. You complete that set of operating rounds, have a stock round, and complete the next set, and then it's over. There is no breaking the bank. There is no. I don't know why this is a different color, but I don't think that that ends the game, at least from what I remember reading. Um, I haven't seen a company get all the way over there, I don't think. Um, and then bankruptcy. So buying the D train and bankruptcy are the way the game ends. But we are not far off of a D train, I don't think. The Murray River is only $40 away from affording it. So I imagine we'll be seeing one more stock round, and then the game will be ending in operating round 8.3. But that's far ahead. Let's look at the game state here. Ursula, having had to fall back and sell shares in last place, not too surprising, but does have, I believe, all the permanent trains they're going to need. So is she the president of 4 companies? I don't think I realized that. Wow. Um, so has the Alberton, the Saurus, the GT, and then also the Summerside. And actually doesn't have all the permanent trains she needs. Needs a permanent train in the Summerside and in the Georgetown. So, a little bit, yeah, probably won't be winning this game, but 4 presidencies, that is a lot of map control. Trailing pretty heavily in shares. Technically, Jose has fewer shares, but if you account for his Union Bank, he's got way more shares than she does. Pilar is pretty far ahead at this point, both in shares in terms of net worth. Has the Mount Stewart, which needs a permanent train, and then the Morrill Branch, which also needs a permanent train. So when that D comes out, could be in trouble. The D trains are kind of painful to out of pocket, but the Mount Stewart in particular has good map position. So a D train there is going to run pretty well. We'll have to see if that makes it worth the while. Jose is going to be buying the Murray River. Ursula selling the Summerside, and I think I did not realize that that was dumpable. Wow. Well, that is quite helpful for Ursula. Puts Pilar in a much rougher position. Um, so yeah, this is an example of exceeding the traditional 5-share limit in the market, and then also having to sell 3 shares. Um, I totally missed that, and it looks like Pilar did too. So bad news for her. Pilar is this only possible because Ursula had to sell shares in the stock round or in the operating round? I think that's what happened. So Pilar probably felt safe because Ursula had 60% of the Summerside or something like that. And Pilar was like, well, she can sell 3 shares and I'll be safe, but neglected to realize that Ursula was going to have to emergency buy a train and sell shares to do that, which put her within striking distance. So that's actually really nice from Ursula. Pilar gets hurt by this quite a bit, I think. Because Summerside has been not really laying any track and really doesn't have great track potential. This is not an X city, so it's not going to upgrade into a 3-hole city. So Summerside's really not going to be running east anywhere. I suppose it could head down through here, but it's going to be probably tokened at Charleston too. I keep calling it Charleston, but I think it's Charlottetown. So Summerside's going to have to end up west here, which is maybe not what they were hoping for. All right, well played to Ursula. That was clever. If she planned it, it was clever. If it was just luck, then no kudos. Buying the Saurus with a permanent train. Pilar buying the Murray River. Jose is going to sell a Murray River and buy the Mount Stewart. Ursula buying the Saurus, so buying her own company, it looks like. Pilar, Murray River. And Jose's going to sell this down. Potentially a stealable company. That would be interesting. Wonder why he sold that. What is he hoping to do? Not sure. Oh, I see. So he sold it so that the Union Bank could buy it? I guess that's... I'm not really sure what's going on there. He's not up against his cert limit, so why not just buy it outright with the Union Bank? I don't know. Ursula buying the Saurus. Pilar, a ton of cash to go around here. It's going to sell out of the Summerside and buy a Murray River, splitting that presidency. Needs to be careful that Jose doesn't do the same thing to her that Ursula just did. Jose buying the Morrill Branch. Ursula passing. Pilar selling out of Alberton and buys the Morrill Branch. Jose selling and buying the Saurus. Pilar also selling the Morrill Branch. Not really sure what's going on here. I'm losing track of people's priorities. Was that a dump? Did the Morrill Branch get dumped on Pilar? Maybe. I don't remember. I thought that was Jose's company. Because didn't we think it was cooperating with the Charlottetown? I may have changed presidency and I missed it. Jose is buying the Alberton and Pilar buying the Grand Trunk, not Grand Trunk, Georgetown. I'll get it right eventually, I promise. Ursula is going to dump it on them. So Pilar is just assuming all of the presidents in the game now. We were saying how Ursula was a 4-president player. Now Pilar, I think, is. Pilar passing will be going second in priority, it looks like. Jose, actually, it looks like first now. Jose is going to buy an Alberton as well. Ursula, Morrill Branch, Pilar passing. Jose, a lot of star trashing going on here. I'm not really sure what the players are doing here. I'm missing something, I'm sure. Ursula buying the Morrill Branch and maybe going to steal that from Pilar. Looks like she sells the A and does steal it. Okay, so there's a lot of presidencies changing hands here. Is the Morrill Branch better than the company she was dumping? I guess it's got more cash, but these trains are going to rust. And in terms of map position, is the Morrill Branch a good map position? Yeah, it probably is. Can link up with the rest of the track in Belfast and then hopefully snag a token in Charlottetown. So maybe that's what they're hoping. Oh, actually, I was looking at the Murray River. Morrill Branch already has a token in Charlottetown, so that is a good company. Okay, makes sense. Pilar's passing, Jose passing, Ursula passing. So that was a complicated stock round. I'm not really sure who came out on top of that. I guess we could look at the net worths and get an idea of that. So Jose needs a permanent train. He's pretty close to affording it. Has good position on Charlottetown, not so good position on Murray River, and net worth wise is in second. Stock portfolio wise is also in second. Pilar needs 3 permanent trains. That's pretty scary to look at. Mount Stewart has good map position. Georgetown also good map position. So if it gets the D trains without too much cost or too much pain, is going to run them for a lot of money. Maybe it could come in that way. The Summerside, I think, is pretty objectively just not going to be great for them. And then Ursula has enough permanent trains for all of her companies. The Alberton is not very good, I don't think. Saurus is okay, and then Morrill Branch is also kind of okay. So Pilar is in for a little bit of pain here in terms of affording these D trains. Is halfway towards one of them, but is going to need 3 of them. Wow. So while they're ahead in terms of net worth, really needs to find a way to afford these D trains. The saving grace here is that I imagine they are going to get to run both of their companies before the Murray River gets a D train, unless Ursula does something really sneaky with shuffling trains to somehow emergency buy a D train first, which I don't think is going to be possible. So the saving grace for Pilar here is that should be able to withhold on both of these companies to get a little bit closer to a D train. All right, let's get this started. Source is going to lay the brass knuckles. I'm coining it, it's a thing, for 180. And the GT is up now. This is Pilar's company. Imagine we'll be seeing a withhold here. Running for 200 and does withhold. So there you go, halfway towards the D train. And look at this. This GT run is going to be nasty. It's going to run from whatever this offboard is all the way across the map up into England at least, potentially over here into the other offboard. I don't really see how it gets tokened out anywhere, so that's going to be nasty for the low price of $300 out of pocket. Mount Stewart, Pilar's other company, also going to have a pretty darn good run. Not probably quite as good as the Georgetown, but honestly, if it's able to start laying track through this area here, it could pretty much equal it. So upgrading peaks and running for 260 is actually going to pay that. I guess I was expecting withholds, but if you own 90% of the revenue between the treasury, the market, and your portfolio, fair enough. Going to shuffle the train out of the GT, so that's how it's going to afford its D train. Charlottetown, not sure where it's heading, running a 7 train for just 170. The Murray River is heading over to Belfast, no surprises, and I'm sure is really hoping that it can get a token in Charlottetown in gray. Going to run for 210 with holds, and this should be the D train. Yep. So the game will be ending in 8.3 as predicted. It hopefully notifies us of that. Ursula, 2 7 trains, and is going to run for still, actually, $70 now instead of 40. The worst double 7 train run you've ever seen. MB, Moral Branch, Trainless is at least going to snag a token in Mount Stewart, it looks like. It does. And is going to shuffle a train out of the Alberton, so that should be a pretty good run for her at least. Summerside, is it going to still try and be functionally suitcased? Will lay itself track. And is going to out of pocket a D train into the S. Okay. So everybody has permanent trains except for, I think Pilar needs a D train in the GT and maybe in the MS as well. Let's look at that. Yes, so that is painful. And the operating order is not going to be right, so it's going to have to emergency sell a bunch of stuff to afford a train in the MS. Maybe just wants to shuffle. Probably shouldn't have laid that track on the Summerside and just shuffled the train and then bought the third D later. I don't know. It's going to be painful. All right, so Soros is breaking out of their corner. Does it snag that token in Georgetown? It doesn't have the cash for it. Runs for just 250. Mount Stewart is heading up towards this track that we illustrated before. Doesn't even have the $20 for, actually it does have $20, but didn't want to spend it for the second track lay. It's going to issue a share. That's a thing in this game. Instead of just immediately going to your presidency, companies will sell shares in their treasury first to help finance a train. Helps Pilar a little bit in this scenario. But it does have to sell pretty heavily. And now has a D train. Charlottetown running a 7 for 300, pays it. Georgetown should just be able to buy the D. Alberton links up with Summerside and is going to run into England now for a better run, 240. Murray River, D train should be tokening here in Charlottetown. Does. D train's 320. Summerside runs for 260 with the D train. Murray or Morel 320. Last operating set here. Now that everybody's afforded their trains, I think we can move this pretty fast. Soros is, I'm not sure where they're getting, all the way over to Charlottetown at least. running for 290. It seems like runs in the end game are kind of dichotomized. You're either running for like 600 or you're either running for 300, plus or minus, $50 either end. So see how that holds out. C run is for 320, paying it out. Georgetown, first run of the Monster D run, and already it's going to stretch from this offboard all the way up to at least England, and actually with 2 track lays could get into this offboard here, but it doesn't have the $20 required for a double track lay. And actually I was saying it wrong anyways, because there's no straight track in this game, so it's going to need to lay some loop-de-loops, which we're getting a hint of here. Runs for 590, but only owns 20% of the company, so that's going to be a problem for her. Mount Stewart, her other company, is working on completing that run, it looks like, running for 490. Alberton is going to upgrade Alberton, 280. Murray River is, I don't know, optimizing its run, running for 470. And then Summerside does complete the link up into this other offboard. Does have money for tokens, but I don't think Pilar wants to token herself out. She's running 3 D trains, so don't know that we'll see that tokens dropped. Runs for 400, and we are into, not quite, we're almost into, actually there was a token there. What did Murray River do? Murray River tokened Q21 here. I don't think that is going to change all that much. Stock round 8, last stock round in the game. Looking at the net worths, Jose is in first, but its runs on the Murray River and the Charlottetown are going to be dwarfed by some of these other runs, and they are not head and shares. So conceivable. Actually, who am I kidding? He's up by $1,100. Looks like he's going to win. Unless something dramatic changes here. It doesn't look like anybody's set up for a dump. And Pilar is shuffling money into the Georgetown to try and run two D trains out of Mount Stewart. I don't know if that's going to work out, but I guess if it only costs you $70, it's worth trying. So buying the Summerside, presumably to protect that presidency. Jose buying the Mount Stewart. It's going to have 2 D trains in it. Seems reasonable. Ursula going forward as well. Pilar maxed out. Jose snags the final share there. So that's the player we thought was probably going to win. And getting 2 shares to everybody else's 1 share in that company probably goes a long way to ensuring that. Ursula buying the Summerside. Pilar. Wow. I picked a game that was ended manually. I didn't realize that. I don't usually do that. So Jose wins by, I guess, default. Would have been interesting to see if anything changed there, but I guess everybody assumed that he was so far ahead, it was his game. Well played. So thanks for watching along with me. I'm definitely still learning 1871. Have only a handful of plays myself and have just been watching some other people play. Hopefully I will be able to bring this back to the channel in the near future so we can continue to learn it.